All right, folks, welcome back for the Week 7 edition of the RosterWatch.com Tradecast. My name is Byron Lambert, and we've had some turnover on the market this week, so let's boogie. A little bit of housekeeping first, just some friendly advice. I know it's a long season, so sometimes we're looking for ways to streamline our efforts here, and I'd just like to give a couple of pointers. I mean, the first thing is we should certainly be targeting losing teams. So the fastest way to figure out, the pool of available players in your league is really to target the losing teams. They're the most likely to be able to shake somebody free from. The next order of business is, do you have any players to sell? If you don't have any players to sell, then you could sit on the sideline and take a breather. Last but not least, let's remember we also want to target teams that are having like bye week problems, which you're seeing a lot of here in week 7, and also a reminder that sometimes we could target players that are on bye because that creates kind of an artificial purchasing moment on a commodity that may otherwise not be available. Of course, we do have a litany of buys this week. The Panthers, Bengals, Cowboys, Jets, Titans, and Texans are all on bye this week. I mean, there's some prominent players across those teams that, if you have an interest, you may be able to toss some offers out there just because those guys are on the sideline this week. Returning from week 6 buys, we have the Packers and the Steelers. So maybe if there was players there that you were looking to move on from, or I guess potentially acquire, but more likely players you were looking to move on from that you had to put on ice there for a week. Remember, you can dust those guys off and you can start to trade them again this week and get right back in the action. Thursday night football game, we have Jacksonville at New Orleans. So players from those teams are unlikely to see much movement this week. It's just a short turn time to get too many deals done. Folks, we're going to just dive right into our top 5 trade moves of week 7, of the week 7 fantasy football trade market right here on the RosterWatch.com Tradecast. Some of these are certainly familiar names we've talked about in recent weeks. Luckily, we've had some turnover elsewhere, but I'd say that the top move of the week, boy, this is tough, actually, now when I look at it. I actually think the top move of the week, the more I look at this, is going after Davante Adams. Player we've talked about at various times so far this season, coming off of another down game, 3.9 points in half-point PPR. It's 2 down games in a row for Davante Adams, and he's only had 4.5 targets per game over the last 2 games. 4 targets in week 5 and 5 targets in week 6. Meanwhile, Jakobi Meyers, who we told you about from camp, has been soaking up a lot of targets and a lot of touchdowns. I mean, there were concerns at camp, just kind of twofold. Where was the chemistry with Adams and Garoppolo, which really there shouldn't be a whole, they're on the same schedule as Garoppolo's been with Jakobi Meyers. So that's no excuse. The bigger explanation might be that Garoppolo is more of an intermediate passer. Not that Adams is only a deep threat, but Garoppolo's a guy who tends to look a little more underneath. We may see that manifesting a little bit. We may see all of this manifesting a little bit. And Adams looks awesome, and he's still the player that he's always been. It's all about the opportunity here, where talent meets opportunity. Talent's still elite. I think the opportunity is less than it's been. We've been accustomed to with Davante Adams, and maybe we need to accept that. Still, this is obviously a guy we're willing to take our chances on, has plenty of upside. If he gets the targets, it's clear as day he's still a top 3 to 5 guy. I mean, if he was with an elite quarterback situation, an elite offense, I mean, Adams could easily still be capable of being the number 1 fantasy wide receiver just from a talent perspective. He still looks that good, and we got a whole slew of matchups here for Adams all the way until the week 13 bye, so this is not a guy you have to worry about. The next 3 weeks look good with Chicago, Detroit, and New York. There's a lot to, I think, be interested in here with Davante Adams when we have a moment to buy low. And I think we know he has a certain role in the offense, and we know you can be pretty certain you're getting a good player here. You know what you're getting with Davante Adams. I think that's why here at the last minute, during the live recording of the Week 7 Tradecast, I made a pivot here to pursuing Davante Adams as our number one trade priority of the week. Right behind that, though, I mean, all of these guys are top. These are actually big-time trade priority. I don't want to understate this. Some weeks we come on here and we say, okay, these guys are buys or they're sells, but they're not bust buys or they're not must sells. These guys are must pursue if you are a winning team that's in a position of luxury to do so. Quickly followed behind Davante Adams, Jonathan Taylor. Look, week 6 was better than week 5 for Jonathan Taylor, but still nothing at all for his managers to be excited about after they absorbed the first, month of the season. Nothing. And they had to spend mid-round draft capital on Taylor. Now we get the news Anthony Richardson is out for the season. You know the Colts aren't going to be contenders. I think there is a real concern that we know that this talent is supreme. And we know that Taylor got paid a boatload of money. But I think logic dictates here that this really could still be, to some large extent, a committee the rest of the season to preserve their highly paid running back in a base season that's, obviously going to be lost, especially when Zach Moss is running on all cylinders right now. I mean, think about Zach Moss is, we always thought he was a little better than demonstrated at the early portion of his career here with Buffalo. But at this point, I think we also know Zach Moss is not as good as we're seeing. Like, this has just been an amazing run that Zach Moss has been on. We'll talk about him a little bit, perhaps on the sell side in a little bit later in this episode. But I think for now, look, you just have to say, okay, Jonathan Taylor, he's a stud. We know he's light years better than Zach Moss. They paid him a ton of money. But I think we have to temper our expectations. I don't think we get the fullest form of Jonathan Taylor this year. Maybe we do. Maybe eventually do. Let's not eliminate that from the possible outcomes. I think it's less likely that we're going to get the full expression of Jonathan Taylor's sickness this year. That said, I think he's still nothing but meat on the bone and upside ahead for Taylor. He should seize this lead role. And clearly they're good at running the ball. They're good with the offensive line. If they were a competitive team, if they turn out to be in that division, which isn't that incredible, then Taylor really could, catapult straight to the top of the running back ranking. So it is possible. I don't want to eliminate that possibility. I guess where I'm at on this is it's just a calculated risk. It's Jonathan Taylor. There's still a buy low moment. I mean, his managers cannot be satisfied, and I don't think they're married to him at this point. And I think there's some percentage of leagues that are truly, managers of Jonathan Taylor are truly worried that Zach Moss has turned this into a full-blown timeshare, at least for the foreseeable future. They may or may not be correct, but I think you can play on that fear, and we're always going to be on the other side. We want to take a crack at going big here. So let those other guys, maybe they're right, maybe they're not right with their fear. Maybe we're right, maybe we're not right with our being a little more bullish on Taylor. But at the end of the day, he's the kind of guy we want to take a crack at because we want to win our fantasy championships. Quickly behind Jonathan Taylor, if you're a winning team, if you're an undefeated or a one-loss team, in my opinion, you should be in a hot pursuit of Justin Jefferson right now. Use your own senses here and, of course, evaluate the news and the information as it comes in. I know there's some concern about how severe the injury is, how long the injury is going to keep him out. Then you start hearing about trade rumors with Kirk Cousins. He's saying he's not going to waive his no trade clause, but then you wonder, does this turn into a lost season for them? And maybe the whole thing unravels, but there's a lot that can go wrong in fantasy football. So this is one we just take our chances with. If it doesn't work out, it just wasn't our year, but we sure as hell tried. And if I got a nuclear team and I got a deep bench, I'd go after Justin Jefferson from a struggling owner right now. Put him on the roster, and if and when he returns, which I think he will, it could be a league winning move, and that's what we're looking to do right here on the Week 7 Fantasy Football Trade Market. Devon Achane, however you would like to pronounce it. We got a few different combinations here. Also on the buy side. So let's call that move number 4. Our move number 1, Davante Adams. That's our top trade mandate of the week, is to pursue Davante Adams in your league. Number 2, pursue Jonathan Taylor in your league. This is our top 5 trade moves of the week in Week 7. Move number 3, pursue Justin Jefferson if you're an undefeated or one-loss team in your league and stash him away to hope to go nuclear later in the season. Move number 4, trade priority. Number 4, the fourth highest priority move of the week on the trade market is for winning teams that are playing long on the season at this point to take a stab at Devon Achane. His price is only going to go up. I think this is the ideal time to go after him, especially after Mostert had that huge breakout. His owners have to be questioning themselves a little bit, and if they're not a undefeated or one-loss team, or if they're a middling team, they're going to be worried. If they're a losing team, they're super worried. And I'd say this is your chance. And I mean, boy, if we could recreate, if Devon Achane is able to come in and recreate what we saw the last few weeks late in the season, that is surely to be a boon for your fantasy fortunes. And then move number 5, this is one we've been hammering on. This is our final recommendation of our top 5 trade moves of the Week 7 Fantasy Football Trade Market on the RosterWatch.com Tradecast. This is one we've been hammering for a few weeks now. We're going to just keep hammering it till we hammer it home. Alexander Mattison, boy, it's just a little disappointing because he finished just a hair short of really what should be tremendous marketability. He had 9.2 half-point PPR fantasy points in Week 6, which is nothing to sneeze at. And you can basically claim that's 10 points or a double-digit outing, but it's just so much prettier if you look down and seen 10 or 11 points there, because had he been able to technically reach double-digit fantasy points this last week, we could have said Alexander Mattison was double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games, with 4 in a row. And he got massive volume in Week 6, which is what we've all been worried about with the emergence of Cam Akers. He had, if not his biggest volume of the season in Week 6, nearly his biggest volume. No buy until Week 13. I mean, I read all this off and I wonder, am I undervaluing Alexander Mattison? But no, we're just going to trust our eyes. We don't like what we see. And then, of course, we outlined the issues with Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins just a few minutes ago. I think all that plays in. And look, other people are in your league are keen to this. I've tried shopping him, and it's not like people are just snap calling on a deal when you send Madison over. But I think you keep massaging these deals, keep working them. I mean, from a value perspective, production on this season, Madison's been a nice player. So if I could, I'd try to move on from him. He's clearly not valuable enough of a player to really be able to liquidate for a whole lot. I think if you're a losing team, I mean, maybe you could split him into 2 lower, high upside guys, but I find that a less likely scenario. Mostly with Madison, what you're looking to do is take him, package him with another player that, presumably you're also believe you're selling high on, and go after one of these buy low dudes we're talking about. I mean, God, I don't know if they'll go for it, but sure does seem like you should be able to take Madison and somebody else and package them together and go after Jonathan Taylor at this point. And no, that's not going to work in 100% of leagues, but gosh, it feels like there should be some portion of leagues where something along those lines could happen. So those are our top 5 moves of the Week 7 Fantasy Football Trade Market. Let's go after Davante Adams. Let's go after Jonathan Taylor. If we are winning team with a pristine record, operating from a position of strength and luxury from the driver's seat. Then we're really lathered up to go after Justin Jefferson. I mean, I could be convinced to really go hard and heavy after Justin Jefferson if I have a team that's in position to do so. And then Devon Etchen, I'd say to a little lesser extent, but kind of that same thought process. And of course, the number 5 move of this week is to continue hammering the sale of Alexander Madison while the marketability is still there. All right, let's pivot back to some other guys that we may want to buy on in week 7 that weren't maybe our top 5 moves of the week. Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles, doesn't sound like it's anything, but there's a little note about his hamstring today and some limitations in practice. That was a new thing that's popped up, but maybe it's an explanation for limited production in recent weeks. Look, 3 out of the last 4 games, no good for Devontae Smith in real life or for fantasy, including last 2 games in a row. That said, if you peel back the onion a little bit, he had a season high 11 targets last week, which is so disappointing with another lackluster output by Devontae Smith. That said, we got 2 good matchups on deck. We love the offense. We love the talent. I'm telling you, Devontae Smith looked better in camp this year than he did last year. I mean, he's going to be a boom bust guy, but he's just, in the end, he's going to mount, in my opinion, probably very nice wide receiver 2 numbers. He's a good player and a good offense. We're happy to roster him. Absolutely happy to roster him, and I expect a big breakout from Devontae Smith any minute now. So if he's available in my league, I'm certainly interested. T. Higgins, Bengals, going on bye. I mean, he's back, but he still hadn't done anything. He hadn't done anything on the season, and now they're on bye. So I think Higgins is a really smart guy to go after this week. I mean, I still am. My feeling is he's still going to eventually get into rhythm and be a nice fantasy player, and he really feels like he could be had for almost nothing at this point. And so I would take my chances pursuing T. Higgins. That's probably a move I'll try to make in my own leagues this week. Garrett Wilson, we talked about him last week. I mean, really unfortunate the season that could have been for Garrett Wilson. That said, he's starting to show out a little bit here lately, and we like what we're seeing from the Jets, and they got a good stretch coming up. Again, Garrett Wilson, the Jets on bye this week. This is one of these purchasing moments. I think Garrett Wilson would be a really shrewd player to make a move on this week while he's on bye. If we're talking the bye week players right now. I think CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard basically shut their trade windows, slammed shut this last week, but the Cowboys are on bye. I'd say Pollard is still maybe a little more concerns about Pollard than Lamb at this point. So maybe there's, something there. And then really Titans, Texans, not a whole lot I'm interested in there. I mean, I suppose there could be some kind of Derrick Henry interest that could exist on the Titans side of things. Again, the teams that are on bye this week that create represent opportunities to potentially pursue players from those rosters on the trade market for your fantasy team. James Cook, running back Buffalo, his role has devolved some in recent weeks. 2 down games in a row, and we wouldn't have been that concerned, but literally the snap counts and the touches are devolving as the season goes on too. That is worrisome from a guy that you all weren't sure he was ever going to be able to seize. We thought he'd take the lead role, but how much volume could he really handle? I mean, all this honestly kind of makes sense given what we know about James Cook's stature and even the kind of player he was in college, that they're going to manage his reps a little bit. So I think we bring expectations down, but clearly 2 down games in a row, lead running back for one of the best teams, one of the best offenses in the league, no bye until week 13. Really a pretty good schedule for James Cook. I can certainly be interested if I need help at the flex or running back position and pursuing James Cook, running back of the Buffalo Bills on the fantasy football trade market this week. Bijan Robinson, don't really think you can buy in on him. He's one of these guys, we said it last week, I think there's still meat on the bone, meaning depending on how he's valued, in your league, I think that even if you had to pay like market value for street price for him, I do think there's some upside there. So I don't hate it, but he's just such a good player. I think he's going to be very difficult to pry loose. He's certainly not a buy low. I think the one thing that's worth mentioning about Bijan is 3 out of his last 4 games, only between 8 and 10 fantasy points in half-point PPR. Austin Eckler, same thing. Like, I think there's no way you're going to pry him loose. His window is most likely shut. In my opinion, we had a few weeks there where we could get Eckler, but now they're off the bye, and he came back and he played without limitation. The only reason I mention him is because the return was only an 8-point game. So it's not like he came back and blew anybody away. And that said, I think he's still close to being an untouchable given his draft capital, the type of player we know he is, the overall upside, the fact that his owners absorbed the injury and the bye and now another bad game. I think he will be difficult to pry loose. So I wouldn't spend much time there, but it is worth noting Austin Eckler in his return only had 8-point fantasy games. So not his managers certainly aren't thrilled about that. And then kind of similar to Bijan, I think there's more there with Eckler, obviously. Only 20% touchdown dependent on the season. Again, even if you had to pay street price for Austin Eckler, there is some upside to be had there. So probably a very small percentage of leagues where Bijan Robinson or Austin Eckler, a deal could get done for either one of them, but certainly guys that if we can get proper pricing, fair deal, we would certainly be happy to acquire on the fantasy football trade market. And then Aaron Jones, again, similar situation. I mean, he's got an incredible matchup this week, coming off the bye after missing basically the whole season outside of, I think, week 1 with the injury. It was like a hamstring injury. His managers have absorbed all that, and they're probably pretty lathered up about playing him this week. So I think, again, maybe not super likely he's available, but a guy that we like. I like Aaron. He may, I'm not sure. We like him. We might like him more than some of his managers do. I mean, at this point, we don't like A.J. Dillon. We like the matchup this week. We like Jordan Love. So again, probably not a guy you get some kind of reduced price on, but maybe a guy that's not so coveted that he can't be acquired. And at the very least, I think that you're going to get what you pay for with Aaron Jones the rest of the season, and I think that'll make you pretty happy. All right, keep moving along here on the sell side. Other sell targets of the Week 7 fantasy football trade market. Guys, let's keep pounding the sells market for Courtland Sutton. It sure would be nice if Jerry Jeudy got traded. We would really like that. But Sutton just living on touchdowns, man. It's unbelievable. He's actually been pretty good for fantasy on the season. We've said, come on here, we say it every week, but not a situation we trust. A lot of indicators that say he's a sell or a sell high, and not a must sell. But if we could move on from Courtland Sutton after we've kind of quit while you're ahead with Courtland Sutton is the view I would take. Drake London, guys, I think he's probably mostly a keep at this point. Looks like a nice keep with a good upcoming stretch of fantasy matchups. We had one of those this last week, but there's plenty more on the horizon for Drake London. And really bona fide wide receiver 2 production the last 5 weeks for Drake London, the young wide receiver in Atlanta. What I would say is, obviously, we're not thrilled about the quarterback of the offense. And we've seen the downside. We're still fearful of that. So I think kind of where our head's at is Drake London is a keep. I think it's working out for Drake London managers. And honestly, I think the outlook is good to continue on a similar trajectory it's been at recently. I think you got a wide receiver 2 here in Drake London, which is very welcome news. But that said, he's strung together such a nice game log the last 5 weeks. If he has that kind of luster in your league, he's the kind of guy we would be willing to move if we could package him up and get a mega player in return. We're not sure if you can, though. I don't know what the marketability is in your league. Even though the game log is good, feels just like the general air about Drake London is probably still not great. So, not sure what the prospects are of actually getting something done, but certainly worth a shot if you see a ripe opportunity in your league to trade Drake London in a package deal for an elite player in return. Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. I think he's probably a keep, but I would still try to sell him if I could. We're really seeing Kareem Hunt cut into the work share. That said, Ford still looks quite good and put up decent fantasy numbers and is still the lead guy. And I don't know how marketable he is given all the dynamics at this point. But Ford is probably a keep, and I think he's a fine keep, but he's a guy that we would try to sell if we could and level up to a better player in return. Zach Moss, he's been incredible since week 2, including 2 monsters. It's just absolutely eye-popping to see that points per game on the season, half-point PPR. Zach Moss is RB4 on the season, which we just know. We know that that simply cannot be sustained, which by definition makes him a sell high. Just the craziest season. Points per game on the season. The top 5 fantasy running backs on the year are Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey, Raheem Mostert, Zach Moss, and Kyron Williams. Not a roll call you would have expected to make even just 1 month ago. I don't know what you could fetch for Zach Moss. Obviously, everybody knows Jonathan Taylor's back. It's hard to say, but the profile is so good, and the recent for snap count and production, even with Jonathan Taylor back, is so good. You might have league mates that view him as some kind of flex. Like maybe there's a desperate owner that needs 2 guys this week, and you could package up Zach Moss and another player and ship him over. And hard to say that you don't think Zach Moss can be a decent play this week. So I think that's the way to try to leverage him, is to try to exploit somebody's plight and move on from Zach Moss while you can, because I think it's more likely than not that as the season progresses, he's going to become a bench guy and may eventually become totally worthless. Michael Pittman, we've talked about it. You just got to decide what to do with him with that offense, that target volume. I think I tend to sell him. Massive target volume, limited production. Let's see here. Let's look up Michael Pittman really quick. Michael Pittman is coming off a 16-point game at Jacksonville. That's why I put him in here. I think it's time to try to sell him. So he's a key. Michael Pittman, based on volume, he's 4 out of 6 games he's had 11 targets or more. And he's only scored 1 touchdown on the season, so this is not a touchdown-dependent player. So there is upside here in theory, but we understand this is a rough offense, a rough quarterback situation. So, probably undervalued to some extent prior to this breakout, which is why we've talked to him in episodes past. Meaning Pittman's probably a decent keep. That said, if you can capitalize on the big performances week 6, 14 targets, 109 yards, 16.4 fantasy points, I would certainly go for it. I just don't know how much we can rely on the Indianapolis Colts passing game rest of season. George Pickens, boom bust profile. We talked about him a few weeks ago, but then he went on bye, so you were kind of handcuffed. Not much you could do. Well, now he's returning. He's returning this week. George Pickens, let's see what kind of matchup it is here. It's a tough matchup against the Rams. Not an impossible matchup, but a tough-ish matchup at the Rams this week. But I think the big thing is that if you look at Pickens' game log, he had a big game in his last game before the bye. So you wanted to try to sell off of that. Well, now you have Deontay Johnson returning this week. And you just know that in an offense that's really not that prolific to begin with, that's certain to reduce Pickens' prospects rest of seasons. And your league mates may be keen to it at this point. That said, I think like this is probably you should try to sell him 2 weeks ago. But if you can, returning from the bye, maybe you could still make a move now before the cat is all the way out of the bag on George Pickens, maybe coming back down to earth here rest of season with the Deontay Johnson return. Another one, Raheem Mostert, I think we have to talk about. I mean, it's just a really interesting case with Raheem Mostert because there's so much to his profile that is a sell high that says this guy's value is totally inflated and we should cash in on it, while we can. I mean, 54% touchdown dependency for Raheem Mostert on the season. Historically, simply a totally unsustainable rate by a giant margin, even if you give them some slack for the fact that this is the Dolphins and they just score a ridiculous amount of points. 15.5 touches per game on the season for Mostert. If you zoom out, that would be a classic sell high profile, 54% touchdown dependency, 15 touch on the season, producing at RB3 on the season in points per game. That's right. I mean, RB3 on the season, points per game, Raheem Mostert. I mean, that's all you need to hear, right? We know he's in a great situation. We know he's a good fit. Clearly, even though he's getting older, like the player is still quite good. But common sense says there's no way Raheem Mostert is ultimately that caliber, RB3. And so while he's riding that high, that's a sell high profile. Like, can you capitalize? I mean, the guy's had a 41-point game this season. He's had a 33-point game this season. So not only is he good, but he's capable of enormous upside in any given week. He was still good when Devon Achane was in there. So it's like there's all these mixed things going on with Mostert. The next 2 out of 3 next matchups for Mostert are tough matchups on paper. Given, the Dolphins are so prolific that you discount that a factor a little bit more than maybe you usually would. But the fact is he's got 2 out of 3 next tough matchups for Mostert. Then there's a bye. And then you would assume that Achane will be returning not that long, after that. So, gosh, there's a lot of sell high stuff there. But the other side of it is, can you really even upgrade? I mean, who are you going to upgrade to? I mean, we've talked about it. I don't think you're trading Mostert for any of the dudes we're talking about right now. Because in the end, fantasy is a game of racking up wins, trying to win this week. We're always trying to win this week. I mean, not at the sacrifice of the future, but it's like sales. Sales, you're trying to get somebody to spend money with you today, right? So it's the same thing with wins in fantasy. You want to get those wins today. And Mostert, it's a very strong argument. You just ride him and rack up the wins right now. Even with the tough matchups, who cares? It's the Dolphins. Ride Mostert, rack up the wins, maybe reevaluate in a couple of weeks, or heading into the bye or coming back from the bye. He's still probably going to be good when Achane returns. So, in the end, I think Mostert is just a really interesting case of a sell-high profile that ultimately is a hold. And prudent people, what they will be doing is just riding that horse and getting all the wins they can right now with Raheem Mostert in their fantasy lineups. All right, folks, let's see if we can construct a couple of mock deals here before we get you out the door and on your way to your own trade wheelings and dealings for Week 7. Let's say we want to go after Jonathan Taylor. Could we send, we talked about it, can we send Alexander Mattison and Cortland Sutton? Boy, that's a lot to give up. I think that's more than you'll have to give up, but it's a deal I would do, and I think it's a deal the Jonathan Taylor owner would take. Could you do Alexander Mattison and George Pickens? Maybe that's another way to do it. Could you do could you do Drake London for Jonathan Taylor straight up? I think you could. Could you do Cortland Sutton and Michael Pittman for Jonathan Taylor? I don't see why you couldn't if the other team you're in talks with is good at running back and they need wide receivers. I don't see why you couldn't get something along those lines done. Let's see here. What about Justin Jefferson? Again, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Cortland Sutton, Drake London, Madison. If you're deep at running back and Madison's a bench guy for you, you've cultivated other options, and he's no longer always a clear-cut starter for you. I mean, I'd trade all those dudes for Justin Jefferson if I was in a position of luxury to do so. If it wasn't going to cost me wins right now that are like precious wins right now. Devon Achane, Devontae, we talked about Adams earlier. Can you go Madison for Adams? Madison from Sutton for Adams? Sutton and London for Adams? I mean, I think there's things to be done here. There's Pickens and Pittman, Jerome Ford and Pittman for Adams. God, it feels like you might be able to get something done like that. Let's see here. Devontae Smith. If I wanted Devontae Smith, what would I go in? I mean, sometimes these moves are what we call kind of like a lateral move, a 1-for-1 trade where we're essentially trying to like maybe balance our roster, right? So maybe we're deep at running back but short at wide receiver. Well, can you trade Jerome Ford or Zach Moss for Devontae Smith or T. Higgins or Garrett Wilson? Like, I think you could do something along those lines. If I wanted James Cook, what could I do for James Cook? Maybe I could do Drake London for James Cook, or Sutton plus Zach Moss for James Cook. Guys, I think there's some deals that can be done with our top targets on the Week 7 fantasy football trade market. All right, folks, there you have it for Week 7. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Roster Watch.